Hey everybody, it's Scott Pinyard, head coach of This Naked Mind, and I'm back with another edition of Coaching Questions and another special co-host for today. I have Carolyn Bennett with me, one of our amazing certified Naked Mind coaches. She runs a company called Sips of Serenity. Hi, Carolyn. I'm glad you're here.
Hi, Scott. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
So you specialize in people that drink to numb out relationships or drink to kind of numb and like hide their feelings from others. What does that mean a little bit? I'd love to get into that a little bit.
I do. Sure. Sometimes it's difficult because sometimes we don't know. It's very hard to differentiate, let's say, between are we drinking to numb out like a toxic relationship that we're in that we don't want to admit that we're dealing with that, whether it's a significant other, a friendship, parents, our own children, or if the drinking is causing those relationships to be toxic. And so I just work with people on trying to kind of wade through that. My first suggestion is always stop drinking first. let's get you, where the alcohol isn't a factor anymore. And then we can kind of examine, okay, do you still feel like you're dealing with some toxicity? And if so, then, we will work through that and I'll pass them on to someone else too at that time. But yeah, that's what I do. I also work a little bit with empaths. We're just people who really, I'm still learning about it myself, to be totally honest, but kind of carry the weight of the world. Like I can walk into a room and I can feel a lot of different feelings and I can pick out the person who's left out. And it was one of the big reasons I drank personally, was to numb out from that. So that is what I do.
That is great. And, it's funny, this idea of drinking to numb relationships. I mean, drinking to numb in general, right, is a big thing. But it's interesting to me that you kind of talk about like drinking to numb out toxic relationships, because that's something I see so much of. And I see it in a lot of, partner or spouse relationships. I see it in a lot of work relationships. It's something that just kind of comes up all the time. Do you have specific sort of experience with your own, as much as you want to share? I don't want to pry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I grew up, and this is very personal, but I did grow up in a toxic household. My mother got remarried when I was about 2 years old, and my stepdad was really, a difficult person to deal with. And he had many troubles outside of just our family. So that's where my interest began, honestly. And then I've had some friends who have gone through some really, really rough interpersonal, basically with their spouse or significant other, and have come to me just to talk them through it. And through the years, then I kind of really dug in and started studying the subject, which, I could go on and on about it. But when you're in a toxic situation, a lot of times you can get into something called a peptide addiction. And that's very real. It's almost as well, many experts say that it's just as addictive as like a synthetic drug. It's when our emotions are very high, our hypothalamus starts pumping out something called peptides. It's like a peptide addiction. Anyway, so that is probably more information than you wanted, but that's really has sparked my interest. And now the science nerd in me has to figure it all out, right? I'm like, okay, I love that part of it, which is where Annie's program comes in, and, just where she is always talking about the science behind things. And I'm learning the science behind toxic relationships. So
I love that. There's a lot to be learned there. And like I said, there's a lot of people that are struggling with that. So, All right. Well, I have a few questions. You want to dive in?
Sure.
Absolutely. All right. Let me read the first one. So here's number one. It says, hi, I have a real issue. I just quit drinking 45 days today. Congratulations on that, by the way. That's awesome. But my husband didn't. He and I used to drink the same daily, a lot, and on the weekends until blackout. I have been able to work around it so far, but I'm feeling truly sorry for him, and I'm started to really worry about our relationship. What advice can you give me to work through this?
Yeah, man, this comes up so often, right? it's just I think the bottom line is when one person in a relationship decides to examine their relationship with alcohol, or they decide to make the choice to stop drinking, the relationship changes, period. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, but it does change. And especially in something like this where, a common ground was drinking together and drinking heavily together. So my advice is always the same. It's always take care of yourself first. Do what you need to do for you, right? And try not to worry what that is doing to the relationship. And that's really hard because for 100 reasons, it's hard. But any projected negativity that comes from that other person is usually when they're already starting to dive in themselves and be like, well, maybe I have a problem too. Maybe I really need to look at this, right, Scott? I mean, that's, and so I say, take care of yourself first. Annie always says, take the high road, don't preach to the other person in your life, significant other or whoever, but show them what a great life it can be on the other side. 45 days is a really good, base. That really gives our listener the base to figure out, okay, I feel really good now, and I know how it feels to be truly sober. So those are just my suggestions. I mean, we dive in further to that too, like, do they need to go to some kind of a marriage counseling, and that is a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I'm not a therapist, but I would definitely suggest that at some point if there's really a struggle.
So one of the things that's really interesting to me about this, and again, you're totally right. By the way, this question comes up a lot. And it's amazing to me that, one partner in a relationship can go through this and then start to see that frustration build, around their partner. And, it gets expressed in a lot of different ways. So sometimes I hear anger, like what the hell is wrong with him, right? Sometimes I hear sadness, and I seem to hear that a little bit of that, like, oh man, what's going to happen? Where are we going to go? And one of the biggest things that I've seen be effective for people in this situation is to start from a place of grace for that other person. I was just on a coaching call with Annie actually not long ago, and she was talking about this concept, this idea of like, there were normal drinkers, years ago, and she thought she was one of them. And now she realized that it wasn't serving her and she had to get it removed from her life. But she started to realize, wait a minute, there's no such thing as a normal drinker, right? We're all on a journey with this. And so one of the things that I find to be super rewarding about this process is actually talking to people who are not as far as we are down the road, right? So there are going to be people where the problem builds, and it builds for a long time, right? I took about 6 years from the time that I first had that thought, like I need to quit drinking, and then quickly shoved it down, right? From that moment until the time that I actually did was 6 years for me. And that turns out to be roughly average. But people take all different types of lengths of time with it. And I think that the one thing that's so key to going through this method and working with this method is grace for ourselves, but then to be able to extend that to others. And, one thing that often happens in a relationship, and I think you touched on this, Carolyn, is this idea that, we'll put it this way. If you've got drinking buddies, right, and you guys are going out and you're drinking the same amount, and then suddenly drinking buddy A says, whoa, I'm drinking too much. Right. Drinking buddy B goes, wait, what? Are you? Wait, am I? Like it gets, we in a way, we like hold up a mirror to people. And I think that's particularly difficult in like a partner relationship, a spouse relationship, any close relationship really, because I don't know what your experience was with this, Carolyn, but for me, it was like, I wasn't ready to deal with it until I was ready to deal with it. So like I would have that thought and then I would shove it down. And it's very likely that this person's partner is in that place right now. And it's also very likely that this person quitting drinking is turning up the cognitive dissonance for their partner. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that requires grace from us to kind of remember what that was like.
Right. Right. And, another thing I see is, and especially in this situation where they mentioned feeling, sad and worried for their partner. Sometimes on the flip side of that, when we stop drinking, it's a big thing, right? I mean, like you said, I don't know how many years. I mean, it was definitely years for me too, from the
Yeah.
time I thought, oh boy, I really need to look at that, to the time I finally stopped, decided I'm choosing to not drink today and
Yeah.
forever. But what it does is, we expect, at least a lot of us, like, we want the fanfare. We want that from our significant other. We want them to come out with pom poms and, cheers waving that we have done this big thing. And they can't do that yet because they are still, stuck in this place.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, that's where the grace comes in. Offer them grace, because sometimes when we are 45 days out, we already start to forget how we felt,
I know, it's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and when you're 2 and 3 and 4 years out, if I was not immersed in this daily, I probably would not be able to extend as much grace. I would have to remind myself more.
Yeah.
Like, man, it took you how many day ones, Carolyn, before you actually, it clicked. And you're right, it kicks up that cognitive dissonance, and it can really be a problem within relationships. And that's why it has to be grace on both sides, so.
Yeah, and sharing too, like the one of the things we used to have, we don't run it anymore because we have the path. We used to have this 3-month program called the Intensive.
Right.
And I remember having a conversation with someone who was from Philadelphia. I don't know why I remember where she's from, but I do.
Right.
Anyway, she was from Philadelphia and she was really struggling. Very similar situation, right? Her and her husband drank. She quit drinking. He was continuing to drink. It was bothering her.
Right.
And so, the initial conversation was around exactly what you said, right? Take care of yourself first, draw those boundaries,
Right.
figure out what you need for support, verbalize it to your partner, which is amazing how many people skip that step.
Right.
And she did. And one of the things that she said to him was, if you're going to drink in the evenings, I'm going to go sit in the den and watch TV. I'm not going to hang out with you, right? It's not something that works for me right now.
Yeah.
And so here's what happened, right? So what happened was he kept drinking in the evenings. She started sitting in the den. And nothing really changed at first, but slowly, this is like over maybe a month and a half, right? Her life is changing so much because she's going through this process and she's not only getting beyond alcohol, but starting to learn some things about herself and starting to grow personally. And he's seeing the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so, she mentions to me, this was maybe about a month after that, she's like, look, we haven't hung out much at all. I'm not sure, like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And I said, did you ask him?
Right.
Right. And so she did. And it turned out that he had been interested in learning what she has and like what she has learned because he's seen the changes in her life. And so fast forward to the very last call of that intensive. This was a couple of years ago. I want to say it was the beginning of 2019 now. He joined her on the call. And he had been watching the modules and was so excited and ended up signing up for the next intensive, right? And so that was just an example of all of those things we just said, with Carolyn saying, take care of yourself and put yourself first and extending grace, but still, making sure that you're taken care of. It can work out amazingly well. Now, obviously there's no guarantees,
Right.
but doing that not only gives you a good chance of this going in a direction you want it to, but it also feels better personally. Right? When we're not angry or kind of fighting over it.
Exactly. And sometimes I think that the breakdown in communication comes within our own fears. Okay, we stop drinking, or maybe we're still in the examining stage, and still trying to figure out our own way. And we don't really know how to talk about it with our partner. Because we don't want to come across as judgmental, as not understanding, as all of that. So we just clam up and don't say anything.
You should really read this book. You need to read this book, right? Like you don't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that is not really the best message sometimes, I mean, you can lay it out on the coffee table as many times as you want with the book wide open and earmarked, but until that person is ready, And until you can have that communication come beforehand, it's a fine line, but people make it through it, and it's beautiful, like you just explained. That's a wonderful outcome, right? And
Yeah.
So I think that's really good, really good.
Awesome. All right, let's go on to question number 2. Here we go. So stress and alcohol go hand in hand for me. Recently, there were some issues on work, and I took on a ton of responsibility and blame for what happened. And of course, I noticed that my drinking went way up. Can you give me some tips on dealing with the stress here? I'm still in the pause phase, so I'm using this to gather data. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, wonderful that they're still in the pause phase, that they're in the exploration, being curious about everything. And I'm sure many times over here, we've talked about the ACT technique, but that is, a really good place to become aware of what are your beliefs behind why you believe that alcohol is a stress reliever. Depending on how far along they are in the pause, we're learning that alcohol actually does the opposite, right? It can temporarily relieve our stress for a good 20 minutes maybe, and then it comes back, full force. So taking that awareness and then, gaining some clarity around it. Where does that come? Where does that come in? Why? What messages are you telling yourself, or what messages from the outside world are telling you that alcohol is the solution? And then doing some turnarounds on that, taking that up a little step, like, well, maybe I could relieve my stress by taking a long walk after work. Maybe I could do some hot yoga. Maybe I could come home, get my PJs and have a hot tea instead. Trying to do a little bit of that work would be really helpful. We are taught as a society that to relieve stress, one of the things is to turn to alcohol. It's on every commercial almost, it's getting better. But, I was very involved in the whole mommy wine culture. I mean, just to be very candid, that was just a thing. I mean, every friend I talked to was like, oh, just pour a glass of wine, it'll all go away. Raising 3 boys, you'll make it through it, the stress of all that. And it wasn't until I got really curious about whether that was the truth that I was able to turn some of that around. Because we all have stress. And once again, as an empath, it seems like we kind of take on everybody else's stress too. And I was a firm believer for many, many years that the only way I was going to get that weight off of me was to drink. I did believe it. And I didn't want to examine it. But if you can really, it sounds like this listener is in a good place, and where they're really examining why they're turning to this and other ways of relieving stress. I mean, the list could go on and on of the healthier ways to relieve stress. And
the thing that jumped out at me was this sentence: I took on a lot of responsibility and some of the blame. Ultimately, maybe, I don't know, there's not enough detail here to know whether or not it's deserved blame. Not that blame's healthy in any way, but one thing that I've found that's been really interesting to me through my journey has been, yes, and everything you said about like dealing with the stress makes a ton of sense, but then questioning the source of it, right? Questioning, is this blame yours? We have a tendency, that's the word I'm looking for. We have a tendency, and by we, I mean humans, and I think particularly true with people, Carolyn, who work with you, and I certainly for me, to take on responsibility, to go into what we call over responsibility, right? That all of these things went wrong at work. It's all of my fault.
Yeah.
I'm horrible. Right. And so, yes, this is like dealing with the stress in the moment, but also like really, and this is a great opportunity to do it in the pause phase, like really questioning what is the basis of all of this, right? This is my fault. According to who, right? According to what? I think is such a huge, huge opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I don't know if this is the right term for it, but in my days when I was finally realizing like, okay, there is a better way to deal with all of this. Stress is going to come at us, whether we're to blame for real or we're not. It was a great tactic that worked for me. I would just sit down and set my timer for 10 minutes and just dump it all onto the paper, just every single thing from somebody didn't replace the toilet paper rolls in the women's bathroom and I took responsibility for that when it was not my job, or, all the way to a big project fell through that had really maybe nothing to do with me, but I was taking it on. So I would dump it all onto paper. I would cross out the things that were legitimately not my job. I didn't have to take the blame for those things. And if it was something that I felt like, okay, I did have some, skin in the game, some responsibility, I would circle it. And then I would decide to work on that on the side. And that was just something that really, really helped me in my moment of clarity, basically. Alcohol aside, I might have been drinking a glass of wine while I was doing this dump on the paper, brain dump, but it really helped. So
yeah, absolutely. And part of the work, I think, as we're going through this, is understanding how we are framing a situation and how that affects us. Right. So one of the things that happens, and I see this a lot, right? So I already mentioned over responsibility, but I see that, we spend a lot of time thinking about the situations in our life, and, human thinking tends to be fairly negative. And so questioning that, right. And exactly with your sort of exercise of like, is that really me? Right. Is that me or is that not me? Right. And being honest, and maybe even asking for help, because I also know that a lot of people have a hard time. Right. I know this is something that I've struggled with for years, is like, all right, what is clearly, is this my fault? Like when something tends to go wrong, I tend to blame myself immediately. My brain is finding all of the reasons, right, that it could have been, or something I could have done differently. But taking that time to step out and actually work through it is massive, because most of the time I find that the stress that people say they're experiencing, especially when it comes to stuff like this, is not real, right? It's made up. The feeling of the stress is absolutely real, but the reason for the stress isn't. And that's why I think writing it out is such a brilliant tactic, because not only, one thing that happens, I like to talk about our thoughts and emotions as being this big black cloud, right? And it's just this swirl of pictures and emotions and thoughts and feelings and all of this stuff. And it's not very ordered. But when you actually order it through language, right, using language to write it down or talk about it, it changes everything, right? And you can see it for what it actually is, which I think is exactly what we need to do to move on.
It is. And, bringing back into the relationship part of it again, and not to go too deep, but sometimes blame is that voice in the head that maybe we grew up with, or it was, sometimes we take it on ourselves, or maybe it's a boss that does not want to, doesn't take a lot of responsibility. And so they are blame dumping. And so being able to write everything down and examine it, like, is this really the real deal, or is it my younger self talking, or is it me resorting back to defense tactics of, I'll just take the blame for everything and then maybe something will go away. And
am I just trying to fix it? Yeah,
exactly. Fix it. And then you turn to the numbing it out sometimes, and etc. So I think those are really good points, Scott.
Awesome. All right, last question. You ready?
Hey, I am.
All right, here it is. Hello, I have an issue with feeling like I can open up to people, and I use alcohol to make it easier. It seems to me like I can't connect well unless I've had a few drinks. Well, a few has turned into many, and now I'm trying to find my way out. Here's my question. What do I do to connect with people now that I'm getting rid of alcohol? I'm scared and not totally sure of exactly how to do this. Any advice would be appreciated. Thanks.
Wow. Okay. So many thoughts. And I think this is another theme that is very common for people. Many people find that they're funnier, they're wittier, they're smarter, they're whatever, when really that's kind of our brain tricking us. We know that now, right? It's the alcohol, it's the quote unquote liquid courage or whatever. Taking a dive into, is it true? Do you really feel that you were connecting better with people when alcohol was present?
Yeah.
Or was it fake connections? Was it surfacey things? Was it, is there any truth to that? And okay, so if you find there's truth, if you're really truly, maybe this person is a true introvert, and that's okay. One thing, side note for myself, I used to think I was like party girl, life of the party. And when I stopped drinking, I realized that's really not me. I'm,
Yeah.
I'm plenty happy at home with a good book, honestly. And it was a fake me. So anyway, taking a look at that. And then if you truly feel like you really are having, some issues with connecting, start faking it until you make it. It sounds really silly, but I have worked with a client through this because she always told jokes. She was a big jokester when she was drinking, and she found herself to be very funny, and she is very funny. She is very funny, but I gave her the challenge of go on the internet or whatever research mode works for you and find some ways to connect. Find those icebreaker questions. Go in and look those things up, because it is a new world. When we do stop drinking, for many of us, at least for myself, I mean, we're talking like a 30-year career of drinking.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know me as an adult without the drink. I mean, I had pretty much been drinking since college, on and off. And anyway, you find the ways that you can connect to others, and you may have to fake it until you make it. Once again, give yourself some grace. You don't have to force things that are not comfortable for you.
Yeah.
I often think sometimes we don't listen to our intuition. This may be the listener's intuition saying, lay low for a while. You don't have to accept social activities. You can really kind of hunker in and get to, fall back in love with yourself again. And you may find that you have a ton of different topics, and you can connect to people on a much deeper level than you ever did before.
I love that. And that's kind of what I heard too, is just like, well, why do you need to now? Right. And it's funny. So I, much the same way, although similar to you, I thought I was an extrovert, and it turned out I'm an extrovert. There was this time in the middle where like, I didn't know how to do it. Like I had a very similar question to this, like, man, I'm finding that I'm nervous, and like all of these things that I used to use alcohol to quote unquote help me with, I don't have that support anymore. And there's a few really tactical, like concrete things that I did that I'd love to just kind of give out. Hopefully it's an option.
Cool.
One of them, like you said, you'd mentioned, Carolyn, going online and finding other ways to connect. There is an amazing thing that once you try this once, you're going to be like, wow, that was amazing. People love to talk about themselves. They love it. They love to talk about themselves. And for you to get to know someone, for you to start to feel like you want to open up and connect, to find those commonalities, you need to hear them talk. So one of the best exercises you can do, and this is particularly true whether it's in a small group or a big party or wherever you're at, is make it your job that night to ask as many questions as possible to anyone that you talk to.
I love that.
It feels a little awkward at first. I will tell you, like I did this myself. I did this both I used to have a sales job. So I did it both in my sales job, but also in my personal life. It feels awkward, but what starts to happen, right? When you start asking people questions, and they're going to tell you something, and you can ask them more questions, and they get very animated. They get very excited, and that really raises the energy of the exchange, and it starts making you feel really good, right? And that again starts to open you up. That's the first thing. The second thing that happens is you start to find those opportunities to connect, right? We tend to connect over similar views or emotions or experiences or whatever it might be. I mean, even similar cars, similar dogs, like whatever it is, right? But you have to find those things first. The way for you to find those things is to ask questions. And just a little tip on that from me, don't go into it with any preconceived notions. Like, oh, I'm going to ask them if they like baseball. And if they don't like baseball, I'm out. Right. But like, you don't like baseball, why? And then they start talking, and it's just amazing the stuff that you can find. And this this sort of getting to know someone and talking to them, and maybe it stays surface for a while, then it starts to get deeper, but that is something that we have so missed out on as drinkers for a long time, right? Because we've been managing our own emotions and managing our own state through a substance instead of like, hey, this interaction is going really well. So that's thing number one. And then thing number two is this idea that there is no wrong way to do this, right? There isn't a way to connect. And I love to frame this for people as an opportunity, to say, hey, it's been a while since you've had to do this, right? It's been a while and you get to learn more about yourself now. So you get to learn, do you like going, there are people that like going to cocktail parties and not know anyone, just like straight up social skydiving.
Yeah.
I've done that plenty of times, right? Like that's something, I won't say I love it, but it's something I can do. Right. And there are also people who like smaller gatherings, right? Or who just want to call one friend and have coffee with that friend, right? Whatever that looks like, it's all an awesome opportunity for you to learn about yourself and figure out what direction you want to go.
Right. I love that. As you were talking, it just made me think, I have always been one to ask questions of others, but one thing that happened when I was actively drinking, I couldn't remember anything. When I got home at the end of the night, I couldn't remember anyone's name. I couldn't remember what we discussed. The questions were more just a time filler. It wasn't genuine. I thought it was at the time. I wanted it to be. But so to add to the questions, if this is a group of people that you're going to be, back in having another experience with, write it down. Once again, come home and make your list of Scott loves baseball, or, and there is something to be said for investing in people. And I think it is definitely something we miss out on when we're numbing that out, when we are, faking it in a different way and looking at people through the lens of a drink. It's so much harder to connect in that situation, but we believe it's easier because our inhibitions are all, and all of that, all of that goes with what we know now about the substance itself. So I think that's a great idea. Make those flashcards when you get home and you'll remember who's who. Right?
Yeah. Make it fun. Exactly. I mean, it's all about exploring that for yourself.
Right.
That's awesome. Well, that is it for us. Carolyn, thank you. I really enjoyed hanging out with you for a bit.
Absolutely. This was great. Thank you.
And if people want to find out more about you, where can they go?
Well, you know what? I'm in the process of changing. It's still sipsofserenity.net, but you can also find me at thesoberempath.com on a website, Facebook, and Instagram.
Awesome.
And that's a great way to connect. So
fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much. And for those of you listening, I appreciate you hanging out with us for a little bit. As always, we'll be back next month with some more coaching questions. We'll see you then. Take care.
Hi, I'm so excited, you guys, because we are just about to start another live alcohol experiment. And if you do not know about the alcohol experiment, you need to literally drop everything right now and go to thisnakedmind.com/LAE. That's LAE for live alcohol experiment. And here's the thing, this 30-day challenge is designed to interrupt your patterns and put you back in touch with the best version of you. It's that version that's living the most joyful life, that version that doesn't need alcohol to relax or have a good time, and that version that's having more fun and is more peaceful than ever. Again, it's a 30-day challenge. It's live. It's starting on the 1st, so hurry up. Go to thisnakedmind.com/LAE. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, as it truly helps the message reach somebody who might need to hear it today.